All right. This clip matters because this isn't diplomacy. This is an ultimatum with a timer. I'm going to play the full 57-second clip. Listen for the timeline and the threat language. Once again, listen for the timeline and the threat language from President Trump. Listen closely.
Following your meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday, has your thinking changed at all as it relates to these negotiations with Iran or the timeline with Iran?
We have to make a deal, otherwise it's going to be very traumatic. Very traumatic. I don't want that to happen, but we have to make a deal. They should have made a deal the first time, and they got Midnight Hammer instead. And this will be very traumatic for Iran if they don't make a deal. Look, if they don't make a deal, then it'll be a different story. But we had a very good meeting yesterday with Bibi Netanyahu, and he understands, but it's ultimately up to me. If the deal isn't a very fair deal and a very good deal with Iran, then it's going to be, I think, a very difficult time for them in the back. I guess over the next month, something like that. Yeah, it shouldn't take, I mean, it should happen quickly. They should agree very quickly. Yeah.
That's a deadline. And when you put a deadline on a crisis in public, you're not just negotiating, you're setting the condition for escalation. This is basically a war clock. Trump's message has 4 hard signals. 1, we have to make a deal. That's not a request, it's a demand. 2, if Iran doesn't make a deal, it will be very traumatic and a different story. That's a threat of consequences. 3, he references Netanyahu and then makes the control point explicit. It's ultimately up to me. 4, he puts a timeline on it. Over the next month, something will happen if we don't make a deal. You put all of those together and you're not watching a negotiation. No. You're watching a deadline designed to force compliance. Deadlines are not neutral. A public deadline does 3 things immediately. It forces Iran into a public decision. Accept, stall. It forces the U.S. into a credibility test. If nothing happens after the deadline, the threat looks hollow. It compresses the entire crisis timeline. Everyone in the region starts moving like action is coming because the leader, President Trump, just put a clock on it. That's why I'm calling it what it is. This isn't a month to negotiate. It's a month to comply. Trump doesn't define what traumatic means. That vagueness is the point. It keeps the escalation ladder open. Economic pressure, pressure-based strikes, campaign-level military action. When the consequence is undefined, the target has to plan for the worst case. And worst case planning increases the chances of preemption, misreads, and escalation. Here's the hard strategic reality. Iran is not going to sign away its sovereignty. If the terms effectively require Iran to give the tools it believes keeping it alive, especially its missiles capability, then the agreement becomes unlikely. Iran does not have enough force that can contest the U.S. or Israeli air power in a sustained fight. It does not openly possess nuclear weapons. So missiles are not a luxury for Iran. They are central to its deterrence and survival strategy. So if the U.S. position effectively requires Iran to reduce its missile capability, Iran will see that as disarmament. And disarmament isn't a deal, it's submission. That's why this deadline reads less like diplomacy and more like a setup for escalation. You are not crazy for connecting this to what happened last year. We watched a negotiation, the same environment, flip into a short, intense conflict window in June, the 12-day war. The key takeaway is not that history repeats perfectly. The takeaway is that once leadership concludes, talks are going nowhere, timelines collapse, and action follows fast. So when Trump says about a month, you should treat it as a decision window, not a casual estimate. This month is not about persuasion. It's about forcing a choice. Iran has 3 options. Option 1, accept the terms that it believes weaken its survival posture. Option 2, stall and buy time. Hope that the deadline is flexible. Option 3, refuse and prepare for escalation. The US has its own credibility problem. If the deadline passes and nothing changes, the pressure campaign looks like theater. So if the deadline is real, the risk rises and the clock runs down. That is how crisis accelerates. If this is heading toward escalation, you will see shifts in diplomatic language. Oh, we're progressing with Iran. Oh, Iran is stalling. Military posture, deployment, readiness messaging, regional air defense positioning, Israeli messaging, talking of red lines, independent action, Iranian posture, missile force readiness, air defense activity, deterrence messaging. The first signs are usually posture and coordination, not headlines. So here's the truth. Trump didn't announce war, but he set a clock that pressures the system towards it. He framed a deal as urgent. The alternative is very traumatic, and the timeline is roughly a month. And if the terms effectively require Iran to give up core sovereignty and deterrence tools, this agreement becomes unlikely. When agreement is unlikely and a deadline is public, the risk isn't theoretical, it's structural. That's what the next 30 days are. Basically, a war clock.